gives me personal pleasure to introduce our last speaker. I was talking with Marion, and we were trying to count the number of times over the last 20 years that we have used her as a speaker on hospice topics and others. My count was about 6 or 7, and so we'll use that as our unofficial count for right now, Marion. Okay. If anybody can lay claim to the title of Hospice of San Antonio, it is our next speaker. Dr. Primomo has, in fact, been one of the founders of the hospice and palliative movement in San Antonio. She's been very active in the last 25 years in teaching medical students and physicians and others on hospice topics. More recently, she was a founder of the Palliative Care Fellowship Program, co-sponsored by the Department of Internal Medicine and Family Practice. Would you please welcome with me Dr. Marion Primomo.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the footstool here. As we usually have problems with that. Welcome to you all. It's wonderful to be with you again. I don't know whether it's been 6 or 7 times, but they've all been enjoyable. And to be with people who are on the same track in palliative care is such a pleasure. We've had a wonderful conference, and at the end of my talk, perhaps we can get together and look at what has happened today. But I was, as you all were, extremely impressed with Bob Buckman, who I had the pleasure of meeting in Montreal years ago and inspired me ever since. We have used his material in teaching extensively, and he's been a godsend to palliative care. I thought that his techniques of telling us about communication are so great. Above all, he told us communication can be taught. Sometimes we think we ought to just know how to communicate, but he taught us it can be taught. And then he said, he emphasized the empathic response. And of course, that is basically what I will talk about today when we talk about why palliative care. Following Bob, we had Debbie James, who was so clear, so organized, so concise, particularly in explaining the new legislation in Texas regarding advance directives, the medical directive. She did a beautiful job. I'm glad I'm associated with her in our ethics committee, and it's always a pleasure to be there with Debbie. Then Henry Perkins gave us a very good idea of the cultural differences in death and dying, and how people's backgrounds, their culture, determines so much of their attitudes in this sometimes difficult field. Dr. Ziegler gave a most comprehensive, elegant talk on pain, management, pain, symptoms, and the management. And I would tell you that keep those pages that are in your book, because you will be referring to them over and over again. He really captured the essence of what we do in pain control. Brenda Guerrero was wonderful, as Brenda always is, and brought forth in a delightful, non-threatening way how we cope with those difficult psychosocial issues. So I am so pleased to be in such good company. And then I'll talk to you more about palliative care. The title is Why Palliative Care? But let me distinguish first palliative care and palliative medicine. There is a difference. And when the fellowship began, we thought, what shall we call this fellowship? Medicine or care? Palliative care has been defined in various ways, and you have that in your book. But I like to say that it is competent, compassionate care of the whole person suffering progressive disease or dying, and comfort and support for their loved ones that extends even beyond death is essential. Now, palliative medicine then refers to the practitioner, to the physician who is carrying out palliative care. But mind, there is a difference. Palliative care involves a team, not just one person. Palliative care is a number of people, a group of individuals involved in this effort. The syllabus contains some notes that I will just refer to quickly in an effort to get to the last part of palliative care. But we did identify the needs. Why do we need palliative care now? What's behind it all? All kinds of reasons. Pain is not well controlled. We have poor physician knowledge. We have Jack Kevorkian doing his thing. But the major need that has catapulted us into an area like palliative care is the fact that there is enormous public dissatisfaction with care of the dying. And people want to be not only free of pain, but also want to be comforted in the time of dying. So 50% of people are still in pain when they die, according to the support study. Sometimes the percentages are even higher than that. It is the push toward physician-assisted death is great, and the polls are increasing, show us an increasing number who feel that in view of the chaos, the anguish, the pain of death, that we should have access to physician-assisted death. But I was very pleased to see the other day in one of our newsletters from our Texas Hospice organization that the state of Connecticut has now coined another term. And the state of Connecticut says physician-assisted living. It sounds better than a physician-assisted death or dying. But we need sometimes to put a better light upon this whole effort and consider it living and not just dying. Now, hospice versus palliative care. Many people say, well, what's the difference between hospice and palliative care? Actually, hospice began in the United States 25 years ago and did not connect with academia. And there is still inadequate physician involvement in hospice. Hospice, the data are there for you to read. Has been present in our country now. We have about 10 hospices in San Antonio. The hospices care for 700-800 people a day now, which is an impressive number. But in the United States, hospice is a reimbursement mechanism, basically. It is sometimes a business, and sometimes hospice has difficulty in reestablishing the roots to the pure hospice that we like to talk about that happened years ago. But hospice is a subspecialty in England. They are not hampered by the reimbursement mechanism that we have here. On the other hand, I shouldn't say hampered. The reimbursement, the Medicare benefit, really helped hospice get going in this country. But many people ask, well, how can I tell a good hospice? We have 10, and in the United States there are approximately 2,500 or 3,000 hospices. So how can you tell a good hospice? And the number one criteria is a cohesive team which respects one another, which works together well, respects one another and works well together. That's the heart of hospice, is the interdisciplinary team. And then the second important feature of a good hospice is strong medical presence. People who are dying do ask the hospice nurse, will contact the social worker, will ask various members of the team, who then in turn must have a physician available to them at all times. And when we need relief from, when the patient needs relief from pain, it must be immediate. The nurse who's at the bedside must be able to talk to the physician immediately and not wait till 5 o'clock in the afternoon and get an order for morphine. Strong physician presence, preferably full-time medical directors. They're very few. They're very few. But it is increasing because palliative care is increasing. There's an academy and approximately 2,000 members, physician members of that. Now, the history of palliative care in San Antonio, you may read, it's been great. We've had a good time with the Palliative Care Fellowship, which is co-sponsored by 2 departments of university and the VA. And we are now having our 3rd fellow. We have our first 2 fellows are distinguishing themselves in palliative care, and our 3rd fellow has just started. The first year or 2, what we've done is establish a curriculum. And basically, the curriculum identified our objectives and the sites of training. And what is very interesting in this endeavor here in San Antonio is the fact that not only the university and the VA, but the whole community is involved. The training occurs in the entire community. We link with the Ecumenical Center, with Santa Rosa, and with some private physicians who are eager to take the palliative care fellows and show them what they do. So it's not just a university effort. It is stretched out into the community and I think makes it more an integral part of our community. The curriculum content consists of many of the things you've heard about here today. First of all, of course, is pain and symptom management. One of the cornerstones of the whole palliative care effort. And following pain symptom management, communication. Essential to developing the links that we need between patient, physician, and caregiver. And then attention to ethics, withholding, withdrawing, physician-assisted suicide, decision-making. The spiritual, and I'll say a great deal about the spiritual in just a moment, but spiritual issues at the end of life may become the most important of all. And cultural issues. You've already heard something from Henry Perkins about the differences that exist in cultural attitudes. Continuity of care, the interdisciplinary team, making sure that the person who is seriously ill or dying has continuity of care between hospital, between home, perhaps nursing home, or perhaps boarding home, whatever the setting is, that people are on the same track regarding the care of that patient. Children, we are very fortunate here in San Antonio to have Santa Rosa Children's Hospice, led by an excellent physician who has the principles of pediatric hospice care firmly in mind. The fellows train at Santa Rosa. Teaching and research. Our fellows teach, and they love to teach, and they do research. So the whole program is as well developed in all the aspects that we're able to do. As we went about this curriculum of palliative care, and as I looked into what we're doing, I came up with the 4 P's of palliative care: the physical, the psychosocial, the principles of ethics, and personal growth. And now, since the first 3 P's have been very well discussed here in our assembly, that leaves me free today to concentrate on the 4th one, personal growth. Now, the physical dimension, I think you heard very well that we now do have methods of controlling pain. And I would say we can control pain in 100% of cases. About 90% of that control can be by oral medication, which makes this very simple to do at home. Now, recently, I think we've taken a step backward in pain management, thanks to Dan Rather. Are you familiar with what he has said about morphine? It's pretty bad. We have spent a number of years trying to allay the fears that people have about morphine. And Dan Rather has had some very ugly things to say about the dangers of morphine, the addiction. It will take a lot to overcome that. It's unfortunate that that happened. The psychosocial points Brenda wrote out so well. One of the most unnecessary sufferings experienced by the dying is lack of communication. Failure to connect in the moments before death. And underneath the psychosocial issue are truth and hope, and they must be preserved at all times. Truth and hope must underlie everything that we do. The psychosocial element of palliative care addresses our deep relatedness to one another. As we enter the experience of serious illness and dying with our patient, we become very, very connected, very deeply related. It becomes a true dialogue, and I like to compare it with Martin Buber's I-thou relationship. It is indeed an I-thou relationship, and I will say more about this in a little bit, in which not only the dying person changes, but also the caregiver, whoever the caregiver is, whether it's the nurse, the social worker, the chaplain, or member of the family, whoever that is, or the physician. And whoever that person is changed by that contact with the dying person. We need truth, we need hope. Many people say when hospice is recommended, they'll say, oh, but they'll give up hope. Hospice is the end. Hospice takes away a patient's hope. But hopelessness is produced not by truth, but by the perception of the person that he's being lied to or not having the truth available. Hopelessness is a quality that we don't need. And when we're taking care of dying patients, we need to preserve hope all the time. The hope of a dying patient is a different hope than the hope for cure. Often the patient who is dying knows full well that they will not be cured. But there are other hopes. There might be hope for a pain-free day, hope for reconciliation, hope for forgiveness. I know one patient that we had recently, 80-year-old woman who couldn't sleep, was dying of metastatic cancer, couldn't sleep. We tried everything for her insomnia. It was unrelieved. Finally, I talked to her daughter. I said, what is there about your mother? What do you think is causing this? She says, I really don't know. I think is everything in order with her spiritually? Yes. And then she said, well, maybe there is one thing. She and my father recently celebrated their common law marriage of 50 years. And she wanted to have the marriage sanctified by the priest, but he said no. And I said, do you think she could be worried about that? And, well, let's ask her. So we did ask her. And she said yes. She really felt that she had committed a sin and that when she died, she was going to hell. Well, we went into action. First, we tried to find her husband. Unfortunately, he was in the ICU at University Hospital. So our next step was to try to explain to her there is a forgiving God, that you've lived in this relationship, you have children, You have been faithful to one another, and God will not punish you, but she was undeterred by what we said. I said it, the nurse said it, the social worker said it. Finally, we got a priest. The priest came and gave her absolution, and she was able to accept that and to die a peaceful death. But she had, the hope was that she would not go to hell. And the priest was able to inspire her with that hope. So, what Sherwin Newland says, incidentally, you have a reference list in your book, which is up to date and contains some books, titles of books that I think you will find very useful in your work. Sherwin Newland wrote a book about dying, and he said, what a patient really fears in the discussion of death is that his doctor is subtly ending the therapeutic relationship. At this point, the patient needs strong reassurance that you will not abandon him. Many patients are afraid to talk about dying with their doctor because they feel the doctor will lose interest in me. They can't give me chemotherapy anymore, can't do anything for me, so I'm not going to even admit that I'm worried about dying. But the greatest fear is the fear of the unknown. And the anxiety of dealing with the unknown can be far more upsetting than the grief of dealing with the truth. Newland said, the dying want to be touched, to love and be loved, to feel safe, to say goodbye, to have someone with them as they die. We heard that earlier. Nobody wants to die alone. How a person dies has a profound effect upon the survivors. People never forget how their loved one has died. Christine Longacre, who has a book that is in your reference list, says, the pain that stays with you when a loved one dies is the pain of the love held back. And Kubler-Ross, who has told us so many good things about death and dying, said, all that really matters at the end is the love you have given and received. The connection, the psychosocial element here is all important. As we talk about ethical issues, we'll not discuss any in detail, but ethical issues in palliative care are a large issue because palliative care deals with people who's are losing control over their lives. Palliative care is occurring in an environment in which resources are becoming scarce and in which controversial life-prolonging treatments are very much in evidence. And therefore, palliative care is faced more with ethical problems, perhaps, than other areas of health care. But in ethics, we have looked at basic ethical principles in the curriculum. We look at decision-making, the advanced directives, and the quality of life, DNR orders. Perhaps the most that we can say right now, and say it very short, in a short, brief manner, is that good palliative care is the alternative to physician-assisted death and euthanasia. Few people would seriously contemplate aid in dying if their physical, emotional, and spiritual pain were managed properly. And Cecily Saunders, the guru of palliative care in England, says, the potential for people to grow inwardly and together is a precious, sacred part of life and must be preserved and encouraged and not cut off prematurely by an induced death. As we examine personal growth, we can see the wisdom of these words even better. So our fourth P in palliative care, personal growth, is a special dimension that affects everybody involved in the process. It is the spiritual dimension that underlies so much of what we do physically, what we do psychosocially, or what we do ethically. And it involves many, many people. Personal growth is all about finding meaning and making peace for patient, caregiver, and physician, all interrelated, all connected. Dr. David Barnard, who teaches humanities in Hershey, Pennsylvania, says, palliative care is whole person care, not only in the sense that the whole person of the patient is the object of attention, but palliative care also demands that the whole person of the caregiver be involved. Palliative care is par excellence, care that is given through the medium of a human relationship. So this is what it is all about. It is the relationship. It is the connectedness of all involved in the dying process. When we speak of spirituality, we need to know that it's not the same as religion, although many people equate that. Spirituality is the feeling of unity with all that is. It's a connectedness to one's center, to one's fellow man, and to one's absolute. That sense of connection. And religion may or may not be a part of it. Religion may be a path to that, may be a way to achieving spirituality. I think it was Michael Carney that said, to be deeply spiritual is to be deeply human. Rachel Remen, who speaks eloquently about issues on death and dying and has educated many physicians, says religion is a bridge to spirituality, but unfortunately, some people never cross over it. So it is a path, but it's not the same as spirituality. Many times in talking with our dying patients, we will begin to address the spiritual dimension in various non-threatening ways, and we will ask something about their religion and the spirituality. And a patient told me just last week something that really in one sentence made clear for me the whole issue of the events surrounding her death. She said, "I'm spiritual. My husband is religious." She told me a great deal. The patient died a couple days ago. She was probably, in the years that I've been with dying patients, probably one of the most shining lights that I have ever seen. It was a privilege to be with her, and that was only a couple weeks. She died at the age of 48. And she had, one of the reasons, I guess the real reason she was so special, and she was able to share that with us, is that she had lived under the shadow of death all her life. She was born with congenital heart disease and was told she would not live beyond the age of 18. She did, and at the age of 18, she had her first open heart surgery. After that, she had 3 more very serious operations. She married. She was a therapist in the community. She had 2 adopted children. And she was able to tell me that, death is not a stranger to me. Every time I go to surgery, I feel that my death might occur. And I have taken it just as a part of my life. And she was able to communicate that to her children and her husband and the people who surrounded her. And her family came from several parts of the United States to be with her as she died. I told her I wish I had known her years before, because she was a very, very enlightened soul. She was truly a light that put the whole issue of death and dying and living in perspective. And she lived life with a grace and a freedom that is so difficult for me to convey, but which is so essential in someone who is dying. This is what we strive to achieve, the bringing about finding meaning and achieving peace. She had that. And she was able to demonstrate that to everyone around her. As you accompany dying patients in their journey, you are blessed when you encounter people like that, because they in turn remind you of your own mortality, but in a way that you can find inspiring and even life-promoting. I have a lot of gratitude to this patient. She taught me a lot, and I just wish she'd been around longer. I would have loved to sit at her feet and learn more. But death is not always beautiful. Some people die having missed the whole point of living. And for some people, dying might be the last chance to get it right. Maybe they've never really thought about what's going on. Some people learn life's most important lessons only at the very end. But some people then, learning this and finding death at their doorstep, use this as an opportunity for growth. Today, we search for meaning. The books on the bestseller list, the television, media's, our newspapers talk about search for meaning and talk about alternatives. And I might mention here, they talk about alternative medicine, complementary medicine, integrated medicine, because it is rising in more than, I understand, 60% of people go to alternative medicine practitioners. More people go for complementary alternative medicine than go to physicians. So behind all of that is a search for something, for a sense of meaning that perhaps has not been given to us in our present day society. One of the best sellers is Tuesdays with Maury. That's on your list. If you haven't read it, be sure to read Tuesdays with Maury. An excellent example of how in the dying of a person, the caregiver grew. A wonderful example of personal growth. The patient dying grew, the caregiver certainly grew. It is eloquently brought out in Tuesdays with Maury. It's not a big, thick book. But patients want their physicians. They want their other caregivers too, but they want their physicians to bring up spiritual concerns. And recent surveys have been conducted by Harvard University, Herbert Benson, who directs a course on spirituality there, and by Christina Puchalski, who is the education director for the National Institute of Healthcare Research. And the surveys show that when questioned, 70% of people want their doctors to address spiritual issues, and only 10% of doctors do it. Because we've not been taught this in medical school. We've not been taught to feel comfortable addressing spiritual issues. Yes, we refer to chaplain, to a priest, but to handle it ourselves is sometimes sometimes a feeling of discomfort arises. We need to change that, because patients do want to see a spiritual quality in their doctors. I think if doctors really felt that, they'd feel more open and more willing to address spiritual issues with their patients. Cecily Saunders is worthy of reading to you. Emotions that physicians experience, and for physicians we could say healthcare workers, while treating the dying, can enrich the patient-physician relationship or the patient-healthcare giver relationship. When we look back, we remember not what death has done to them, but what they have done to our thoughts about it. Our patients can be a light to illuminate the dark corners that exist in their caregivers. And indeed they can. Spiritual issues, not being afraid to put ourselves on the line so that we can give as a person and in true dialogue. In today's world, where we pursue pleasure, profit, power, prestige, as people become more separate from one another, there are many signs that there is an intense hunger for a healing of the mind, body, and a desire for meaning in life and a search for deeper relationships. Even as technology drives us farther apart, we search for something that holds us together, that connects us as human beings. This connectedness, once the sense of connectedness is felt, the whole separateness falls away. The differences in color, in culture, in financial status. Once there is a human-to-human connectedness, everything else is secondary. Kathleen Singh, who's written one of the books in your reference list, says, "The tragedy is not in dying. The tragedy is living disconnected from life, being separate, being not connected with other people, with our environment, with everything that is around us. Real spirituality, the feeling of unity that exists." Kubler-Ross has two very excellent quotes. And as we discuss issues, as we look at issues of death and dying, and what we need to do to connect and to feel a part of the process, it comes to us that perhaps we should get that feeling long before we die and not wait till the end of life to establish this connectedness and to lose the sense of separateness. And Kubler-Ross said, "The fear of death dissolves in the fire of victorious living." And also she says, "The best preparation for death is maximum living." So we look at death not as something we need to contemplate or meditate upon, although those are worthy practices too. They can, Christian meditation, examining the mystical path to higher consciousness that the Kabbalah tells us about, the Tibetan Buddhist practices, they are all useful in helping us to get a knowledge of death and a feeling about death in the middle of living. But what is important is to be aware of the present moment, and to live the moment as it is, not yesterday or tomorrow. You know, there's a story of the compassionate Buddha. He went around the village and said he was greatly revered, and people came up to him and said, "Are you a saint?" And he said, "No." "Are you a prophet?" He said, "No." "Are you God?" And he said, "No." "Well, what are you then?" He said, "I am awake." I am awake. To be awake is to throw oneself fully into life, to experience all the dimensions of living. Rachel Remond tells a story of somebody went into a bingo hall once. There's a big sign on the wall, and it said, "You have to be present to win." You really do have to be present to win. So perhaps one of the most essential ingredients of comfort with dying patient is to be aware of the moment, to be aware of what's going on around us, to leave ourselves open, to put aside the boundaries between the patient and the physician. I have to look at this objectively, and you need to stay right here, and I can't touch you. No, you need to be present to win in the immediacy of the situation. So our patients teach us how to live. And if we're open to them, so many gifts come to us. By sharing their journey, their fears, pain, and their hope, it becomes a mutual journey of self-discovery. And we can move from our own fear of death to acceptance and even transcendence. I have a patient now who is dying of ALS. I met her a year ago. We made a pact. We would journey together. She has, I don't know how much time, and I don't know how much time I have. I'm getting older. But we are journeying together. We are We are connecting. We are telling each other our thoughts. She's not able to speak anymore, but she has a computer device, and we communicate that way. But journeying with people as they're going through this process is what it's all about. We need to connect. We need to be a part of them, and they need to be a part of us. So palliative care challenges us to use our whole selves in the service of others. And in relieving a patient's pain and helping foster a connection to their loved ones, we can truly help a person die a peaceful death, and we can help them connect with a larger framework with loved ones and with their divine or their God. Actually, Viktor Frankl says it so well when he tells us about our gift that we have in taking care of dying persons. He says, "It is the one who is ill who helps the one who is well in the struggle to find meaning." And that is how it works. Now, people who are dying seek to be free of the pain and the anxiety and the loneliness and loss of control associated with dying. They look to us to help them through this process, and they may not be able to articulate it well, but in helping them, we in turn grow as people. In not withholding ourselves, in connecting, we ease their loneliness, we ease their fears. The personal growth, I think I can probably tell you about most poignantly, perhaps, and dramatically. And this is where my talk differs from having given a talk 2 days ago. A talk on spirituality to physicians, intended to be a talk that we will explore in further detail at the university in helping physicians in training become more comfortable with this whole subject. Following the talk, one of the faculty asked, "Dr. Primomo, I'm confused. I don't know what to make of this. I don't know where you're coming from." And my answer was, well, does it make any difference? Isn't it the message that's important? And then I thought about it some more, and this was just 2 days ago. And I we didn't have a big dialogue concerning this. But important to him was where I was coming from. And perhaps it does make a difference where we're coming from. Perhaps we should not hide behind a professional mask. And perhaps I need to explain to this audience now why, after 50 years in medicine, 20 years in the care of the dying, I say the things that I do. Despite the chaos of many deaths, and some deaths are very chaotic, despite contact with dysfunctional families, and there are a lot out there, what comes through loud and clear in this connection is the essential goodness of human nature. That's the bottom line. It points up, and I've been blessed with the experience of years of seeing that behind all of this is the essential goodness of human nature. In being with my fellow man in his anguish and in sharing with him his darkest moments, I, together with him, have found the greatest beauty. But I have to go a step further. My colleague wanted to know where I was coming from. An answer to that requires me to become very honest. In fact, perhaps to become spiritually naked. But at my age, that's not a bad sort of nakedness. Some years ago, I'm going to share with you something that I really had to think about before I started to do this. Some years ago, I attended a conference in California, a conference on spirituality and healing. And I came away with 3 insights that have remained consistently true for me. I call it my Palm Springs Quality of Life Index. And it's kind of a reality check for me. I have this on my bulletin board, and every now and then I'll go take a peek at it. Is this still true? Yeah, it's okay. And it's been a number of years. I'll tell you what they are, and they're true for me. This may not be true for everybody, but in the interests of spiritual thought and in trying to share spirituality with you, these 3 insights are: nothing is greater than love. I'm exactly where I should be at this time in my life. And the best is yet to come. The best, who knows what the best is? Some people have asked me, do you mean the hereafter? Do you mean heaven? I fully believe the best is yet to come right here. But this is open. This may not be what happens. But those 3 insights have nourished me and have enabled me to do the work that I do now. I am deeply indebted to all my patients who have helped me with this, and I'm indebted to my absolute, my divine, my God, for having allowed me to get old enough to experience the wisdom of this and the nourishment of the Spirit, and the fact that living with these insights, I can wake up in the morning and say, yes, I might die today, and I can say it with comfort. So I'm glad to share this little insight with you in the hope that perhaps it will give you some idea of the dimensions of spirituality for yourself, because we're all human. To just wrap up, since my time is very, very tight here, just let me say that palliative care is not an option. It's something we need to do. Patients, families, physicians, and all of medicine needs palliative care if we are to survive the assault upon our souls. And perhaps palliative care can be the healing force needed to humanize all of medicine. American medicine suffers pain and future is uncertain. Our palliative voice in the medical mainstream is small, but we have an obligation to our patients and to ourselves to speak out against those who would rank impersonal, monetary concerns above the growth of human potential. And in this world that has so many problems with pleasure, power, and profit, the plea for the human spirit to find meaning and wholeness in the face of adversity and transcending even death may remain unheeded unless it is recognized, respected, and cherished. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. May I address questions?
I may have a semantic problem beside that. Spirituality seems to me to be more likely, or more potentially, an individual experience. Religion seems to emphasize the connectedness because the term religion is related to ligation, the tying of things together. Would you like to comment on religion as a plus?
Oh, indeed, religion is a plus. I hope I didn't leave the idea. Religion certainly is a plus, and often essential to the development of spirituality, but it's not the whole part of spirituality. This is what I meant to say here. Spirituality is this feeling of unity with all that is, and religions bring one to this by means of ritual, by means of sacraments, by means of various methods and techniques that will help a person find that unity. Is that all right? I see no difference. I see no downplaying of religion in that sort of feeling. Religion and spirituality are intimately connected. But for some people, religion is a very valid path. For some, it is not. And spirituality is still present because it is, as you said, uniquely human. To be deeply human means to be deeply spiritual. Okay, anything else? Anybody else? I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of it. You asked if there's a change in educating concerning spirituality, is that correct?
And I think the addition was, what about funding for research? Is spirituality going to be a topic that will be funded for research?
Well, I hope so. It is. There is research being conducted. Herbert Benson, Harvard is doing great things. Christina Puchalski in quality of life instruments. Yes, there is funding for that. And the fact that it is now, I think I mentioned that 60 medical schools in the United States are teaching spirituality. There is funding for the teaching of a very important part of our development. If you'd like to speak to me later, we'll talk some more about that. Any other questions? Comments about spirituality? No?
I think we're afraid to be naked again.
I didn't say it again.
I think this spirituality is a very personal issue, and it's like you say in the beginning. It's like being naked.
Like what? I didn't hear that.
Naked.
Nature.
Naked. It's like being naked.
Absolutely. Thanks. My hearing aid's not working. It is. It is like being.
A quick question before I read that there is a connection between spirituality and sexuality. Do you have any thought about that?
Wow. I have a lot of thoughts. Perhaps I better not say them here. Anything else? But that's the topic for my next presentation. There's a big connection, and that's all I'll say.
Say on behalf of the audience, Marion, thank you for sharing your journey with us. Again, I'd like to have Michelle Saunders again wrap up the program for us.
I wanted to thank everyone for coming. Please take a few moments before you leave to look at the blue evaluation sheet, fill it out, leave it on the table as you leave. Your certificates of completion are ready and they're in alphabetical order in manila envelopes as you leave. Thank you again.